Rob Staton of Seahawks Draft Blog joining us now on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. Rob, how's it going?
Awesome to be here, guys. Awesome. We
are happy to have you. I'm going to start, I guess I'll just go from top to bottom with the Seahawks draft. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure we'll spend the majority of time on the first several picks here, but there are some great sleeper picks that Seattle got, and I know you're excited to talk about a few of these guys. But I'll start with Zabel, a player who we all knew about. Many people, one of the most commonly mocked players to Seattle, but I think people doubted whether or not John Schneider would actually pull the trigger and get an interior lineman at 18. What did you make of the pick? Were you surprised by it?
No, a fantastic pick. You know, for me, he was the 13th best player in the draft. I think for years, Seahawks fans have watched players like this go to other teams and have success. So it's amazing to see one of these players come to Seattle now. And he's just got amazing upside. I think people have been almost talking him down a little bit. Oh, it's a safe pick. It was the expected pick. But this is a guy that had the explosive traits similar to Creed Humphrey, to Zach Tom, to Frank Ragnow, you know, players who are at the top end of the NFL in terms of offensive linemen. So I think he's got a lot of upside. I think he's the kind of player they needed to insert a left guard who can have an instant impact. And he is the complete package. He's exactly what the Seahawks needed with their first pick.
You and I are really excited about a player. I'm trying to get Stacy on board with this pick. Tell me why you like Elijah Arroyo so much.
Okay, so for me, was the 17th best player in the draft. And when you listen to John Schneider say afterwards in his press conference that he could have been a top 20, top 15 player if it wasn't for the injuries, I think that speaks to just how good he was. You know, I think you can put him anywhere and create mismatch opportunities. You can line him up in all sorts of different positions. He fights as a blocker. Yeah, there's room for improvement there, but there is with every single college tight end who comes into the league. He's smooth in the open field. He's got soft hands. You could see at the Senior Bowl how good he was at boxing people out in the red zone. He can catch away from his body. He just gives them a chance to have this dynamic pass-catching tight end that they've never really had. We see a lot of other teams have it, and when you have that kind of a weapon, it can elevate your offense to the next level. I think there's a bit of George Kittle of him as a pass catcher, maybe not as a blocker, but certainly in terms of he gets that second level as a target. So I'm really excited about Elijah Arroyo.
I'm going to go to Emmanwori. Seahawks trade up to take him, obviously, early in the second round. I thought he wasn't going to be an option. I thought he's long gone. Seattle didn't take him. He's going to go early second, and the book's been written, and of course they go back and get him, which I feel like had to be in part Mike Macdonald behind the scenes going, John, you got to get me this guy. Because of Mike Macdonald's background, maybe it's unfair that Nick has drawn comparisons to Kyle Hamilton. You know, maybe that's setting a bar that's a little unfairly high. But what do you make of Nick, what he can bring, and what are the strengths and weaknesses you saw on film?
I think that's a really important perspective to raise, because Kyle Hamilton was pretty much the best player in his draft class. And the reason that he fell to the middle of the first was simply because of his testing. And Nick Emmanwori is very different. You know, he's not somebody who is as polished as Kyle Hamilton is, but he's got the testing, he's got the amazing upside. I think he's really good in the open field. That's the thing. When you see a guy with his size, you think, oh, he's going to be playing at the line, he's going to be amazing versus the run, he's going to be hammering people. And that's not really his game. He's sort of better in space. He's got amazing range for his frame. I think it's the versatility that Mike Macdonald will love, that you can line him up in all sorts of different positions and confuse opponents. He will enable you to blitz in creative ways. You can have him drop when you think he's going to cut and vice versa. I just think he's the kind of weapon that, as we've learned more about Mike Macdonald over the last 12 months, you can just see him perfectly fitting in that defense. You know, they were celebrating in the draft room when they picked him, not surprised. I'm just excited to see what Mike Macdonald's got cooked up for this guy.
Only 2 defensive players drafted for the Seahawks. And Schneider said, look, it wasn't planned that way. This is kind of just how the cookie crumbled. I understand that as well. But on the other side, I'm thinking, yeah, it probably should be this way because the offense needed more help. What would you say about the way the draft went down overall?
I think that's the perfect point. You'd look at the defense last year. By the end of the season, it was performing like a top 10 unit in the league. And yes, they needed to add some more, but they brought in DeMarcus Lawrence. They brought back Jaron Reed. Ernest Jones has come in. You know, Nick Emmanwori will be a huge impact player, you'd imagine, given they traded up for him. So I think it needed to be an offensive offseason by and large. They needed to improve that offensive line. They changed the coaching staff. They've added some talent on that offense. And the other thing I mentioned is, even though the defense didn't get a lot of love, it's not just Emmanwori. You know, Rylie Mills, He had the 6th best pass rush win percentage amongst defensive tackles in college football last year. He had the same number of pressures as Mason Graham, who was the 5th overall pick. He led defensive tackles in sacks. You know, for me, he was a 3rd-round player who lasted to the 5th, purely because of an injury, which may redshirt him for this season. He has amazing athleticism and upside. So even though they only drafted 2 defensive players, the 2 defensive players could end up being, really good picks for them for the long term.
Feel free to mention a name we've discussed already, Rob, or one that we haven't yet. But earlier we were playing some draft superlatives, and one of them was maybe the best value pick, a guy that you were surprised to see the Seahawks find where he was. Maybe he's there for reasons unrelated to his play. Was there someone you felt like this was a value pick, like they really got someone special here for a relatively low price?
Yeah, I think for me, Torrey Horton, I had a fringe second, third round grade on him. He's a clear starter potential at receiver. I had him rated higher than Trey Harris, who went in the second round to the Chargers. He carried Colorado State's offense for a couple of years. They've not had good quarterback play there, but somehow he seemed to just continuously make plays, whether it was competitive catches that he would go up and get those contender grabs or, burning past people. He showed at the combine that he can run. He wasn't even 100% healthy, and he's running in the 4.4s. So I think if it wasn't for maybe some of those injury things, or maybe the fact that he played for Colorado State rather than one of these high-power offenses in the Big Ten or the SEC, he probably would have gone a lot earlier. So I could not believe that he was there in the 5th round. I think it's a steal. Would not be surprised if he is a starting receiver in a couple of years for the Seahawks.
Some fans were a bit concerned that the interior offensive line wasn't addressed enough. I'm fine with it. I think you got Zabel, obviously, and then there are going to be some veterans, whether cap casualties or, training camp type stuff. What do you say to that? Do you think they should have addressed it a bit more, or do you feel like the plan going forward is to pick up some veterans?
Well, I think there's a few things here. Like, first of all, Gray Zabel is going to be an instant star, so that's a really good pick right off the bat. Bryce Campbell-Dew was the 4th most explosive tester among all offensive linemen. He's got a very similar testing profile to Gray Zabel, so there's every chance that they could develop him to be an equally good interior blocker for the Seahawks. So I think they've got a couple of good players there who can help that interior offensive line. Then you've got the other guys on the roster, and I know people are, they're skeptical as to what happened last year, but I just don't think any of these offensive linemen were put in a good position last year. They were constantly in the shotgun. It wasn't conducive to success at quarterback or for those offensive linemen. I think they were put on an island, really, which was not helpful for them. I think this staff have got a clear vision on how they're going to move forwards now. And the likes of Christian Haynes, for example, really fit the zone blocking scheme very, very well. Oliver Timmy's zone blocking grades at Michigan were pretty good. Jalen Sandell has clearly got the body type and the athleticism to play in this system. Even Anthony Bradford was a good zone blocker at LSU. So I think they've got the players there. Now they've just got to put them together within this scheme. It's a young group, so they are going to have some growing pains, you'd imagine, at the start of the season. But I think this could be similar to the defense. I think by the time you get to game 8 and 9, as we saw with the defense last year, I think this offense, and in particular this offensive line, will be coming together. And it may be a good thing that they're young, they can grow together, and you can have 5 consistent starters, which the Seahawks have not had for a long time.
Talking with Rob Staton right now. This is how fun this draft class was, Rob. We are 9 minutes into this conversation, and only now are we asking you about Jalen Milroe, quarterback taken by the Seattle Seahawks. Rob, I'm so curious about your kind of analysis and view of Jalen heading into the draft before knowing he was going to be with Seattle. So I want to hear what you didn't like also and what some of the knocks were, and then how you feel about him now being a Seahawk and the fit there.
Well, if you were going to play a game tomorrow for Alabama and Jalen Milroe was the quarterback, you wouldn't put your house on him converting a 3rd and 10, in a big game. That's the thing. And his intermediate and his short-range passing, the accuracy can be quite poor. You see it in the games. You saw it at the Senior Bowl. And that's a problem for him. But the great thing about this pick is you can work on those things behind the scenes. And offsetting, if that is always going to be a bit of an issue for him, you've then got the other side of the coin, which is the great arm. If you go and watch the Wisconsin game, go and watch the Georgia game last season, you can see him making big plays downfield. He's got an accurate downfield throw, cannon of an arm, and then the running ability. He's like a Formula One racing car. When he gets to the edge, his ability to sort of turn upfield and dodge defenders is unbelievable. And unlike some of these other running quarterbacks, he's got a running back build. Like, he's got a thick build to him, so he can run through tackles, he can finish runs. Look, nobody's going to look at this and say he's the nailed-on future of the Seattle Seahawks. But when you get to pick 92, why not take a chance on this guy? So they'll work on the flaws. He's got a limitless ceiling, and if it works out, the Seahawks could have a star on their hands.
Yeah, you said that if it works out, the Seahawks can have a star on their hands. I'm looking at this whole draft and saying, if this works out, I mean, the Hawks could be turning a corner here. And I didn't expect them to have the type of draft that they put together. How much of this do you think is Schneider McDonald, a combination? Because honestly, this is what his second draft to where we can look at John Schneider and say he probably had the most influence on this. But, I mean, there's no way Mike McDonald doesn't have his hands all over this too.
Well, absolutely. But I do think John Schneider deserves a lot of praise because the work he's done since January is some of his best work as a GM, in my opinion. You know, you think about the things he's had to do. He's had to change the quarterback, and he did that very efficiently. When other teams like Pittsburgh and the New York Giants have had a lot of trouble doing that, he had to deal with the DK Metcalf situation. He moved on from that very quickly. It didn't drag on into the offseason. He's had to completely change the offensive staff. There was a lot of pressure on him to improve the offensive line. He made that first pick in Zabel, and now he's had a draft that looks like it could be a transformational draft. It looks like the best draft for me since 2012. So there's no guarantee that it's going to work out the same way as it did 13 years ago, but you just look at the class and you think, this is going to give the Seahawks a chance to take the next step. And that's what everybody wants to see now. You know, Seattle's been a decent team for a long time. Can they go on and become a great team now? And I think this draft class will give them the chance to do that. I think the good thing about the coaching staff is you can see their input in the players that they're drafting. The plan is obvious to the fans. When the fans can see what the team's trying to do, it just helps with buy-in. And now everybody can see the kind of team they want to be, the kind of players that are going to help them get there. And I think it's all connecting. You know, the staff, the scouts, I think the fans are buying in. So I think it's a good time to be a Seahawks fan right now.
Is it a good time to be certain Seahawks veterans that might be looking over their shoulder in some of these crowded rooms? I know that it's a bad idea to, in general, look for a rookie to make an impact. So maybe someone like Noah Fant isn't necessarily worried. But when you look at the running back room, the tight end room, you know, are there, guards? Shoot, I don't know. Rob, is there a Seahawk player or two where after this draft concluded, you thought, I wonder what this means for him?
Well, the obvious one is Noah Fant, because he's, you know, you can save some money there moving on from him. I just wonder, because the cap space they have is quite healthy at the moment, maybe they just keep him into training camp, you know, see where Elijah Arroyo is with his health. Maybe they want to keep all of the tight ends and sort of let this play through preseason. And then, yeah, I think there's probably one or two others that are maybe looking at this as well. I think getting Damian Martinez obviously into the mix. You just wonder what Kenny McIntosh is thinking here. And, you know, maybe even those two starters who, you know, Ken Walker's coming to the end of his contract. You know, if Martinez has a major impact, does that create situations? But for me, it's just good competition. You know, you want players who are looking over the shoulder. You want players who are motivated, who've got that chip on the shoulder to try and keep a job. And because Seattle's cap situation is so healthy at the moment, they might just keep these guys and let it all play out in camp. And I think that's a healthy thing.
When it's all said and done, when we start week one, how different do you think this team looks and performs? I know it's hard, you know, a lot of things that happen in preseason or whatnot, but just how optimistic are you after going through, like you mentioned with my last question, John's been going to work, man. How much better do you think this team is?
Well, I think that remains to be seen because there's so many changes. The offensive system is going to be completely different, whether that is the zone blocking, whether it is the route concepts that they're going to run with a passing game. Clearly, they're going to use their tight ends a little bit differently. So that's a huge change. You've got a new quarterback. You know, can Sam Darnold do what he did at his best for Minnesota last season is a huge question mark. And fingers crossed he's going to be really good again this year, but we don't know until we see it. I think the thing that gives me the most optimism is with Mike McDonald, you could see the major changes that happened to that defense. We've been waiting years to see the defense take a step forward, and it definitely did last season. And I think with the experienced staff they have on offense, it's not just Clint Kubiak, it's all of the support staff that they put around him. You know, there's some serious NFL experience in there. So I think that offense, even if it maybe even starts a little bit slowly like the defense did last year, I think they're going to get it going. So by the end of next season, I don't think the Seahawks are necessarily going to win the Super Bowl next year, or they're going to be a major contender. But I just wonder, this time next year, we might be sat here thinking, okay, they've had the 2026 draft, and that's the finishing touches to get them towards where they can be a serious contender, and that's where you want to be. So I think this is a major step forward this offseason.
I wanted to just put a bow on this conversation by having a very similar step back kind of look at the draft. Earlier, you mentioned this was your favorite draft, maybe the most intriguing draft since 2012. One of the most popular questions that Bump and I both see is drafting with just John versus drafting with John and Pete, and have we gotten enough of a feeling for what a just John Schneider draft looks like? Sometimes I can't tell if that's a fair question because we don't know how much control John had. Like maybe Pete let John take the reins entirely, and maybe this is just John growing. I have no idea. But do you find yourself wondering, leaving a draft like this, if is there a different version of a John Schneider draft that we're just now starting to see? I kind of wanted to throw that type of question your way because I see it all the time. And Rob, I never know how to answer. Like, I really don't know.
I think it was always a collaborative approach. And I don't know Pete Carroll personally at all. So I don't know how involved he was in that. But I get the impression that they worked together. They talked things through. I'm not sure that Pete Carroll would have ever sort of stormed into the room and say, we're not doing that. There's been a few picks in the past. Like there was talk that John really liked Andy Dalton, for example, and Pete Carroll said no. But by the end of the sort of the situation, it looked as if they came together and agreed on what they were going to do moving forward. Obviously, it's going to be a little bit different because John's not having to communicate with Pete and they're having to do it as a collaborative approach. But I just think that there was enough of John Schneider in those previous drafts to think, yeah, he's working alone, but I think it's more continuation of the things he did in the past. And now maybe the one thing he's doing pretty well is I think it's combining that, best player available, not really forcing anything, sort of giving themselves the best opportunity to draft talent. And I think the one thing he's done, which is a new dimension this year compared to the last draft and the last 2 or 3 drafts, is he's picking specifically for the identity that these coaches want. So I think maybe that's been the slight change there. But I still think Mike Macdonald has a lot of impact on this draft. So I still think it's quite a team effort. But I think John, throughout, going back to 2010, has probably had the biggest say in everything that they do.
I could listen to this guy talk forever, says the 206. Rob, tell the 206 and listeners where they can find and hear more from you.
Yeah, SeahawksDraftBlog.com. Loads of stuff on there, focusing on the draft and the aftermath of the draft, and on YouTube, Rob Staton Football as well. Check that out, subscribe, it'd be much appreciated.
He is Rob Staton. Rob, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, guys.